The greatest victories are the ones witnessed by the people who once believed you would never survive. The applause echoed through the grand auditorium of the Charlotte Civic Center as four confident black teenagers stood shoulder to shoulder beneath warm stage lights, each wearing a navy graduation blazer with a silver academic stole draped proudly across their shoulders. Mason adjusted his tie before smiling toward the audience. Maya clasped her certificate with steady hands. Miles exchanged a quiet grin with his twin brother before looking toward the front row. Madison wiped away a tear as cameras flashed from every direction. They had just been announced as recipients of the state's highest scholarship recognizing academic excellence, leadership, and community service. Hundreds of parents rose to their feet in a standing ovation, but the loudest cheers came from one man sitting quietly in the center aisle. Marcus Johnson slowly stood, dressed in a simple charcoal suit that fit him perfectly without calling attention to itself. His hands trembled as he applauded, not because he was nervous, but because 10 years of sleepless nights, impossible choices, unpaid bills, packed lunches, science projects, scraped knees, birthday cakes baked after midnight, and countless whispered prayers suddenly felt visible beneath those bright lights. The master of ceremonies smiled warmly before inviting him onto the stage. These remarkable young people asked us to recognize someone special before this ceremony concludes, she said. Their father raised all four of them alone. The room erupted into another wave of applause, even stronger than before. Marcus hesitated for only a second before walking toward the stage, uncomfortable with attention, yet unable to refuse his children. His polished dress, shoes echoed softly against the wooden floor as he climbed the steps. Mason stepped forward first and embraced him. Maya followed, wrapping both arms around his shoulders. Miles and Madison joined until all five stood together beneath the lights, holding each other while photographers captured a moment no one in the audience would soon forget. Near the back of the auditorium, a woman froze before she could return to her seat. Vanessa Johnson had only attended because a client had donated money to the Scholarship Foundation, and her company had purchased a table for the event. She had glanced casually at the program earlier without recognizing the names. Now every sound around her seemed distant. Her eyes remained fixed on the family standing together on stage. Marcus looked older than she remembered, the lines around his eyes shaped more by patience than hardship. His posture carried quiet confidence instead of exhaustion. The children were no longer babies. They stood tall, intelligent, kind, and remarkably composed. Vanessa felt her heartbeat quicken as realization settled over her with crushing clarity. Those were her children. The four babies she had not seen since they were wrapped in hospital blankets were now young people preparing for college, smiling beside the man she had abandoned. She searched each face for traces of the infants she once held only briefly. Mason carried Marcus's calm expression. Maya had inherited Vanessa's eyes. Miles laughed exactly the way Marcus used to after a long workday. Madison smiled with a warmth that made strangers smile back without thinking. None of them looked toward the audience, searching for someone missing. None of them appeared incomplete. They looked whole. On stage, the presenter handed Marcus a microphone. He paused, glancing at his children before quietly saying, "Everything good you see here belongs to them. I simply refuse to stop showing up." Silence swept across the auditorium before another standing ovation filled every corner of the building. Vanessa remained motionless, her hands trembling around the event program. 10 years earlier, she believed she had walked away from a difficult chapter of her life. Only now did she understand that she had walked away from the greatest story she would never be able to rewrite. The applause inside the auditorium continued long after Marcus and the children stepped away from the microphone, but the sound slowly faded beneath the weight of memories he had carried for an entire decade. As he smiled for photographs beside Mason, Maya, Miles, and Madison, another image quietly returned to him, one that had never completely disappeared. 10 years earlier, there had been no applause, no celebration, and certainly no audience willing to witness the beginning of his journey. There had only been the steady hum of fluorescent lights inside a hospital room, for newborn babies sleeping in transparent bassinets, and a silence so heavy that it almost seemed to have a heartbeat of its own. Vanessa stood near the window with a small suitcase resting beside her feet. She avoided looking directly at Marcus as she spoke in a voice that sounded distant. almost rehearsed. She admitted that she had fallen in love with someone else and believed her future belonged somewhere beyond the walls of that hospital. Marcus searched her face, hoping to find hesitation, uncertainty, or even regret, but she remained emotionally detached, convinced that leaving was the only decision she wanted to make. He glanced toward the 4 tiny infants wrapped in matching blankets, each one breathing softly, completely unaware that their lives had already changed forever. When the hospital room door closed behind Vanessa, the quiet became overwhelming. Marcus stood alone between the bassinets, realizing that every plan they had once made together had disappeared within a few heartbreaking minutes. The nurse gently asked whether there was another family member who could help after discharge. Marcus forced a small smile and quietly answered that they would manage. At that moment, he did not know how those words could possibly become true, but he refused to let fear become the first lesson his children inherited from him. The first weeks felt like one endless day without a beginning or an end. For bottles needed warming almost at the same time. For tiny cries echoed through the modest apartment during every hour of the night. Laundry baskets filled faster than he could empty them. Baby formula, diapers, wipes, and doctor appointments quickly consumed nearly every dollar he earned. He learned to sleep in short moments while sitting in a rocking chair, because lying down often meant another child would begin crying before he could close his eyes. Some mornings he accidentally poured orange juice into his coffee mug instead of milk because exhaustion blurred every routine. Yet every time one of the babies wrapped tiny fingers around his hand, he found enough strength to keep moving forward. His neighbors slowly noticed the determined young father carrying 2 infant carriers at once while pushing a double stroller through the apartment parking lot. An elderly woman from downstairs occasionally left homemade soup outside his door without expecting thanks. A retired mechanic across the street repaired his aging sedan for little more than the cost of parts after seeing Marcus buckle 4 child safety seats into the back. Kindness arrived quietly, one ordinary gesture at a time, reminding him that even strangers could help carry burdens they never created. Every evening, after all 4 babies finally drifted asleep, Marcus stood in the doorway of their shared nursery. The room was small, the paint slightly faded, and the furniture came from secondhand stores, yet it felt more valuable than any mansion because it held every reason he still believed tomorrow was worth facing. He promised each sleeping child the same simple thing, even though none of them could understand his words. He promised that they would never question whether they were loved, never doubt whether someone would come when they called, and never believe they had been abandoned because one person chose to walk away. That promise quietly became the foundation upon which the next 10 years of their lives would be built. As the months slowly turned into years, Marcus discovered that survival eventually transformed into routine, and routine quietly became strength. Every weekday began before sunrise when he packed 4 small lunches across the kitchen counter, carefully writing each child's name on a reusable container because even identical twins deserved to feel like individuals. Mason always wanted apple slices. Maya preferred strawberries whenever they fit the grocery budget. Miles never forgot his dinosaur spoon, and Madison insisted on carrying the smallest backpack even after she outgrew it. Their modest house echoed with laughter, more often than crying now, although every morning still felt like directing a tiny parade through breakfast, missing shoes, tangled jackets, and endless questions that only curious children could invent. Marcus worked as a maintenance supervisor during the day, often accepting extra evening shifts repairing commercial equipment whenever overtime became available. The work was physically demanding, but he never allowed his exhaustion to greet the children before he did. No matter how late he returned home, he always paused outside the front door, took one deep breath, and reminded himself that they deserved the best version of their father, not whatever frustration the day had left behind. The children never measured wealth by expensive vacations or large houses. They measured it by pancake breakfasts on Saturday mornings, library visits every Wednesday evening, movie nights with homemade popcorn, and bedtime stories that Marcus somehow managed to tell with different voices for every character despite barely keeping his own eyes open. Every report card found its place on the refrigerator. Every drawing covered another empty section of the kitchen wall. Their home gradually became a scrapbook built from ordinary moments instead of luxury. Financially, life remained uncertain. Unexpected medical bills, school supplies, worn-out shoes, and rising grocery prices often forced Marcus to recalculate every dollar before payday arrived. He learned how to repair appliances instead of replacing them, shop during discount hours, and stretch leftovers into another family dinner without making the children feel they were missing anything. Pride never prevented him from asking practical questions or learning new skills. On weekends, he completed small handyman projects for neighbors, and before long, his careful workmanship earned recommendations throughout the community. What began as a way to cover monthly expenses slowly developed into a dependable side business. Customers appreciated not only his craftsmanship, but also the honesty with which he treated every home he entered. Years passed almost without warning. The babies who once fit inside matching bassinets became energetic elementary school students carrying backpacks nearly as large as their shoulders. Their teachers often commented on their kindness toward classmates, their willingness to help others, and the quiet confidence they displayed even during difficult assignments. Marcus listened to every parent-teacher conference with humble gratitude because he understood those compliments reflected character more than grades. He never spoke bitterly about Vanessa, even when the children occasionally asked simple questions about their mother. He answered with honesty that protected their hearts instead of feeding resentment, telling them only that people sometimes made choices they later wished they could change, and that their worth had never depended on another person's decision to stay or leave. As the children grew, so did Marcus. The frightened young father who once stood alone inside a hospital room gradually disappeared, replaced by a man whose resilience had been shaped one ordinary day at a time. Without realizing it, he had become exactly the example his children needed, proving that consistency could accomplish what anger never could, and that showing up every single day was often the quietest form of extraordinary love. By the time the Quadruplets reached middle school, Marcus no longer measured success by the balance in his bank account, but by the conversations that filled the dinner table every evening. Mason talked excitedly about engineering competitions. Maya carried a notebook filled with essays and dreams of becoming an attorney. Miles spent hours building small machines from recycled parts in the garage, while Madison volunteered at the local community center whenever she had free time. Their curiosity filled every corner of the house, and Marcus encouraged every question, every idea, and every impossible dream. His handyman business, once created simply to keep food on the table, had quietly evolved into a respected property maintenance company serving businesses throughout Charlotte. One satisfied customer recommended another, and another followed after that. Marcus hired his first employee because he could no longer complete every project alone. Within a few years, he employed an entire team of skilled technicians who shared his belief that honesty was more valuable than shortcuts. Clients trusted his company because every promise was kept, every estimate was transparent, and every repair was completed with care. Even after the business became profitable, Marcus continued driving the same dependable pickup truck that had carried baby strollers, soccer equipment, science fair projects, and grocery bags for years. His children occasionally teased him that he could finally afford something newer, but he always laughed and reminded them that memories never depended on the vehicle that carried them. Instead of purchasing a larger house, he invested in their education, music lessons, tutoring programs, and family vacations to national parks where they learned that the greatest adventures often happened far away from expensive attractions. One autumn afternoon, Marcus received a phone call that changed the direction of the entire family. The principal of the children's school explained that all 4 students had been nominated for the prestigious North Carolina Scholars of Tomorrow program because of their academic performance, leadership, and volunteer work. The program included mentorship opportunities, university visits, and the possibility of receiving full scholarships upon graduation. Marcus remained silent for several seconds after hearing the news because he remembered another season of life when he had wondered whether he could even afford enough diapers for one more week. That evening, he celebrated with homemade pizza and chocolate cake from the neighborhood bakery, insisting that every achievement deserved to be honored, no matter how busy life became. The children laughed around the kitchen table while sharing stories from school, completely unaware that their father quietly stepped into the backyard later that night and looked toward the stars with grateful eyes. He did not ask why the difficult years had happened. He simply thanked God for carrying them through those years together. A few weeks later, Elegant invitations arrived announcing the annual statewide scholarship gala where finalists would be recognized before educators, business leaders, and community organizations. The event would take place inside the Charlotte Civic Center, one of the city's most respected venues. The children celebrated with excitement as they imagined touring college campuses and meeting inspiring professionals. Marcus smiled as he watched them planning outfits and practicing acceptance speeches they hoped they would never need to give. None of them realized that someone else would also receive an invitation to that same event through an entirely different path. Across the city, Vanessa accepted a corporate invitation from the consulting firm where she had built a successful career. She viewed the gala as another networking opportunity, another evening filled with conversations, business cards, and potential clients. She glanced briefly at the event schedule before placing it inside her purse without noticing 4 familiar last names printed beside the scholarship recipients. Fate had quietly reserved the same room for 2 lives that had traveled in completely different directions, and neither of them yet understood how profoundly one ordinary evening would reshape everything they believed about the past. The evening of the scholarship gala arrived wrapped in the gentle warmth of early spring, and the Charlotte Civic Center shimmered beneath hundreds of elegant lights as families, educators, business leaders, and community volunteers gathered to celebrate young people whose futures were only beginning. Marcus adjusted the collar of his charcoal suit while waiting outside the entrance as Mason carefully straightened his tie. Maya quietly reminded Miles not to forget his acceptance speech card, even though he insisted he had already memorized every word. Madison smiled as she linked arms with her brothers, laughing at the nervous excitement that seemed to spread through all 4 of them at once. Marcus watched them for a moment before opening the glass doors, silently grateful that the children entered every room believing they belonged there. Across the spacious lobby, Vanessa stepped inside beside several executives from her consulting firm. She wore an elegant navy evening dress and greeted clients with practiced confidence, discussing upcoming projects while accepting polite compliments about her recent promotion. The gala felt like another professional obligation, another evening where relationships could become opportunities. She barely glanced toward the families gathering near the registration tables because her attention remained fixed on the business leaders she hoped to meet before dinner. Inside the ballroom, round tables covered in crisp white linens surrounded a beautifully decorated stage framed by large screens, displaying photographs of scholarship finalists serving their communities, leading school organizations, and volunteering throughout North Carolina. Marcus and the children found their assigned table near the front, surprised that the foundation had reserved seats so close to the stage. Several teachers approached to congratulate the family, praising the quadruplets not only for their grades, but also for their kindness, humility, and willingness to encourage classmates who struggled. Marcus accepted every compliment with quiet gratitude, always redirecting the praise toward his children rather than himself. Vanessa eventually took her assigned seat only a few tables away, unaware that destiny had quietly placed them within sight of one another. As the program began, she listened politely while scholarship sponsors welcomed the audience. One by one, student profiles appeared across the large screens accompanied by photographs and short biographies. She paid little attention until the announcer smiled and said, "Our next scholarship recipients are 4 remarkable siblings whose inspiring story of perseverance has touched every member of our selection committee." 4 familiar last names appeared together in bright white letters. Johnson, Mason Johnson, Maya Johnson, Miles Johnson, Madison Johnson. Vanessa felt an unexpected ripple of recognition, but she immediately dismissed it as coincidence. Johnson was a common last name, she reminded herself. Then the screen changed again. A family photograph filled the stage behind the presenter. Marcus stood in the center wearing a simple smile while 4 confident teenagers surrounded him with unmistakable affection. The air seemed to leave Vanessa's lungs all at once. Every conversation around her faded into distant echoes. She leaned forward in her chair, unable to look away. The children she had last seen as newborn infants were standing before her as young men and women filled with confidence, intelligence, and joy. Marcus looked older, yet stronger than she remembered, his quiet dignity reflected in the proud faces surrounding him. As the presenter invited the Johnson family to the stage, Vanessa remained frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly that her fingertips turned pale. She had entered the ballroom expecting another ordinary business event. Instead, she found herself sitting only a few yards away from the life she had abandoned, watching it shine brighter than she had ever imagined possible. The master of ceremonies smiled warmly as she welcomed Marcus to the podium once more, but before he could speak, she turned toward the 4 teenagers standing proudly beside him. "We asked each of these remarkable young people to answer one question," she said. "Who has been the greatest influence in your life?" Mason accepted the microphone first. He looked toward his father before facing the audience with steady confidence. "When I was little, I thought every father packed 4 lunches before sunrise and still made it to work on time. I thought every father stayed awake helping with homework after working all day. I did not realize until I grew older that my dad was doing the work of 2 parents without ever asking for sympathy." A quiet murmur spread across the ballroom. Maya stepped forward next, gently holding the microphone with both hands. "People always ask how 4 children can be so close. The answer is simple. We grew up watching one person choose us every single day. He never complained about what he lost. He focused on what he still had. That taught us gratitude before success." Vanessa lowered her eyes, feeling every word settle heavily inside her heart. Miles smiled as he adjusted the microphone stand. "My friends think my father taught me how to fix engines because he owns a maintenance company. He did. But the greatest thing he ever fixed was our fear. Whenever something seemed impossible, he never said it could not be done. He simply said, 'Let us figure it out together.'" Soft laughter filled the room before giving way to another round of applause. Madison was the last to speak. She paused for several seconds, looking directly at Marcus with unmistakable admiration. "I do not remember being abandoned because I never felt abandoned. I only remember being loved. Every school play, every doctor appointment, every birthday, every difficult conversation, every celebration, he was there. I used to think that was ordinary. Now I understand it was extraordinary." Marcus quietly wiped moisture from the corner of his eye before embracing each of his children. Around the ballroom, many parents reached for tissues as well. Several scholarship committee members exchanged emotional glances, recognizing that they were witnessing something far greater than an academic award ceremony. The foundation president stepped onto the stage carrying an additional plaque that had not appeared in the printed program. "Tonight," he announced, "our board unanimously voted to recognize someone whose example reminds us that character creates opportunity. Marcus Johnson, this Community Legacy Award honors your unwavering commitment to your family and your community." The audience immediately rose to its feet once again. The standing ovation lasted so long that Marcus appeared almost embarrassed by the attention. He accepted the plaque with both hands before speaking softly into the microphone. "Thank you, but I believe every parent in this room would do everything possible for their children. I was never trying to become extraordinary. I was simply trying to be present." Those words echoed through the silent ballroom with remarkable simplicity. Vanessa remained seated, unable to move. She realized the man standing on that stage had never built his life around proving anyone wrong. He had built it around loving 4 children without conditions, and that quiet decision had transformed every person who stood beside him. For the first time in 10 years, she understood that the greatest success she was witnessing had nothing to do with business, money, or recognition. It was measured in trust, in laughter, in respect, and in 4 young lives that reflected the father who had never stopped showing up. When the ceremony finally ended, the ballroom slowly transformed from a place of formal speeches into one filled with quiet conversations, congratulations, and family photographs. Teachers embraced students, scholarship sponsors exchanged business cards, and proud parents captured every smile they could before the evening became another cherished memory. Marcus stood patiently while Mason, Maya, Miles, and Madison posed for pictures with classmates and mentors who had encouraged them throughout the years. He never stepped to the center of the photographs unless one of the children gently pulled him there, insisting that he belonged beside them. Vanessa remained near the back of the ballroom long after many guests had begun leaving. She watched the family from a distance, noticing the effortless way the 4 teenagers naturally gathered around Marcus whenever they laughed or shared a story. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness, and no uncertainty. Their bond had been built through thousands of ordinary days that she had never witnessed. For several minutes, she debated whether to leave quietly and protect herself from the conversation she feared. Instead, she slowly walked across the ballroom until she stood only a few feet away. Marcus noticed her almost immediately. His expression did not change. There was no anger in his eyes, no bitterness, and no satisfaction at seeing her overwhelmed by emotion. He simply looked at her with the calm honesty that had always been part of his character. Vanessa opened her mouth several times before any words appeared. "Marcus," she finally whispered, her voice barely carrying above the gentle conversations around them. "I do not know if I even deserve to say hello." Marcus nodded politely. "Hello, Vanessa." His tone was respectful, neither warm nor cold, simply sincere. The children noticed the unfamiliar woman standing beside their father and quietly gathered nearby. They had seen photographs from many years ago and understood immediately who she was. None of them spoke first. They waited, following the example Marcus had modeled throughout their lives by allowing silence to remain peaceful instead of uncomfortable. Vanessa looked toward each of them, her eyes filling with emotion as she struggled to recognize pieces of herself within faces shaped mostly by the father who had raised them. "You have all grown into incredible young people," she said softly. Mason thanked her with simple courtesy. Maya offered a small smile. Miles nodded respectfully. Madison quietly said, "Thank you." Their kindness somehow made the distance between them feel even greater. Vanessa turned back toward Marcus. "I have imagined this moment many times," she admitted. "I thought if I ever saw you again, you would hate me." Marcus glanced toward the children before answering. "Hate takes energy away from the people who need it most. I needed that energy for them." His words were not intended to wound her. They carried only quiet truth. Vanessa lowered her eyes. "I have wanted to apologize for years." Marcus listened without interrupting. "I cannot change what happened," she continued. "But I am deeply sorry for leaving all of you." Marcus remained silent for a moment before responding with remarkable gentleness. "An apology matters because it tells the truth. Thank you for saying it." She looked at him with surprise, almost expecting accusations or questions that had waited 10 years to be asked. None came. Marcus had long ago stopped searching for explanations that could never restore lost time. The children watched their father carefully, seeing once again the same quiet strength that had guided every season of their lives. In that moment, Vanessa realized the greatest difference between the man she remembered and the man standing before her was not success, confidence, or recognition. It was peace. He no longer carried the weight of the past because he had spent 10 years building a future that was too meaningful to be overshadowed by yesterday. The ballroom gradually emptied as the evening came to a close, yet none of the people gathered around Marcus seemed eager to leave. Teachers shared stories about the Quadruplets' generosity. Business leaders congratulated the students and quietly asked Marcus about his growing company, impressed that someone who spoke with such humility had built a respected business without ever making himself the center of attention. The children answered questions with confidence, always finding a way to include their father in every conversation. Vanessa remained nearby, uncertain whether she should stay or quietly disappear before causing further discomfort. Finally, Marcus looked toward her with the same calm expression that had never changed throughout the evening. "Would you like to walk with us to the parking lot?" he asked. She looked surprised by the invitation, but nodded gratefully. The five of them walked together through the wide hallway lined with framed photographs celebrating past scholarship recipients. Their footsteps echoed softly across the polished floor while the children chatted about college visits, engineering programs, writing competitions, and volunteer projects planned for the summer. Vanessa listened carefully, realizing she knew almost nothing about their interests, their personalities, or the countless memories that had shaped them into the remarkable young adults walking beside her. Outside, the cool evening air carried the scent of blooming trees as city lights reflected across nearby office buildings. They stopped near Marcus's pickup truck, the same dependable vehicle that had carried his family through years of ordinary life. Vanessa smiled faintly when she noticed how carefully the truck had been maintained. It reflected the man who owned it, practical, dependable, and quietly proud without seeking attention. She turned toward the children. "I know I cannot expect anything from any of you," she said softly. "But if you are willing, I would like the chance to get to know you someday. Not to erase the past, because I know that cannot happen, but simply to learn who you have become." The four teenagers exchanged thoughtful glances before looking toward their father. Marcus did not answer for them. He never had. He had spent years teaching them to think carefully and speak honestly. Mason finally stepped forward. "We cannot change what happened either," he said respectfully. "But we can decide who we become because of it." Maya nodded in agreement. "Trust takes time," she added gently. "We are willing to take one conversation at a time." Miles smiled politely. "We have a lot of questions too." Madison stepped closer and offered a warm but cautious smile. "Maybe we can start with getting coffee someday." Tears gathered in Vanessa's eyes, not because everything had suddenly been repaired, but because she had been offered something she no longer believed she deserved. The possibility of beginning with honesty instead of pretending the past had never happened. Marcus watched the exchange quietly. He understood that forgiveness was never something he could demand from his children, nor something he could deny on their behalf. Each relationship would have to grow naturally, if it grew at all. As they prepared to leave, Vanessa looked at Marcus once more. "You gave them every reason to become good people," she whispered. Marcus smiled gently before answering. "They made that choice themselves. I simply tried to give them a home where kindness could grow." The children climbed into the truck, laughing about where they should stop for ice cream before heading home, and Marcus followed them with the peaceful confidence of a father who no longer needed the past to explain the present. Vanessa remained standing beneath the evening lights, watching their taillights disappear into the quiet Charlotte streets, understanding that some families were not defined by perfection, but by the countless ordinary days when love chose to remain. Several months passed after the scholarship gala, and life quietly returned to the rhythm Marcus and the Quadruplets had always known. College acceptance letters gradually arrived, each envelope opening another door that had once seemed impossible. Mason earned admission to a respected engineering program with a generous scholarship. Maya was accepted into a nationally recognized university where she planned to study political science before attending law school. Miles received invitations from several technology programs because of the innovative projects he had designed throughout high school. Madison was awarded scholarships for public service and education, determined to spend her future helping children discover opportunities that circumstances often tried to hide. The family celebrated every achievement in the same familiar way they always had, with homemade dinners, laughter around the kitchen table, and gratitude that filled the house more completely than any expensive decoration ever could. Marcus never spoke about sacrifices or difficult years. Whenever someone congratulated him, he simply smiled and reminded everyone that his children had earned every opportunity through their own determination. During those same months, Vanessa slowly became a careful and respectful presence at the edge of their lives. She never demanded forgiveness and never tried to reclaim the years that had already passed. Instead, she accepted occasional invitations to meet for coffee, attended one of Madison's volunteer events, and listened far more than she spoke. Trust did not return in dramatic moments. It arrived quietly through honesty, patience, and the willingness to accept responsibility without expecting immediate comfort. The children appreciated her sincerity, but they never confused a new beginning with the past they had already lived. Marcus supported whatever pace allowed his children to feel secure, never encouraging them toward resentment and never pushing them toward reconciliation before they were ready. One warm summer evening, just before the Quadruplets prepared to leave for college, the family gathered in the backyard for dinner beneath strings of simple lights Marcus had installed years earlier. Neighbors who had once delivered diapers and homemade meals now celebrated beside young adults whose lives they had quietly helped shape. Laughter drifted through the evening air as stories from childhood were shared once again. Someone asked Marcus what advice he would give parents facing impossible circumstances. He looked around the table before answering with the same quiet humility that had guided every chapter of his life. "Do not spend your best years trying to win an argument with yesterday," he said. "Spend them building tomorrow for the people who are counting on you today." The table fell silent for a moment because everyone understood those words had been lived long before they were spoken. Vanessa lowered her eyes with quiet reflection, recognizing that Marcus had never defeated her through anger, wealth, or public recognition. He had simply refused to let heartbreak decide the future of four innocent children. As the evening came to an end, the Quadruplets gathered for one final family photograph before leaving for college. Marcus stood in the center, surrounded by the sons and daughters who had become his greatest accomplishment. Vanessa remained respectfully beside them, no longer pretending she could rewrite history, but grateful she had been given the chance to witness what unwavering love had created. When the camera captured that moment, it preserved something far more valuable than success or redemption. It preserved the quiet truth that a family is not defined by the day everything falls apart, but by the countless ordinary days when someone chooses to keep showing up with patience, integrity, and love. Marcus never won back the life he lost 10 years earlier because he no longer needed to. He had built something stronger, a legacy carried in 4 grateful hearts, proving that the greatest victory is not making those who left regret their decision, but creating a life so full of purpose that regret no longer has the power to define the ending.